I found that people often think that the best locations in Baldursgate 3 is the Grove and the Goblin Camp, the main locations in Act 1. And although I really do love those locations, I gotta say, I don't think those are anywhere near the best locations in Baldursgate 3. I think when you actually get to Baldursgate, it's hard to reveal some of its best content, such as the dungeons in Baldursgate 3. Because for many people, they actually drop the game when they get to Act 3, and they actually don't see through some of the best content that Baldursgate 3 has to offer. Also, just something to note here real quick, I understand that a lot of areas in Baldursgate 3 can be classified as dungeons, I guess. So my meaning is an area that is either separated or completely disconnected from the main hub. So in Act 3, that would be places like the lower city, as well as the sewers entirely. Areas that you generally have to teleport to, or they are underground, but they're sort of disconnected from the other sections. And with that, the locations I'm going to be going over is the House of Hope, Cazador's Palace, Sarevok's Hideout, and Shar's Enclave. I could have added Baal's Temple here just because it fits the vibe more than it fits the criteria, but I decided that Sarevok's Hideout is a much better example.
Good little thief. Good. Keep going like this, and you'll get to live.
Now, the first point I have here is that in the dungeons of Baldursgate 3, they have some of the most satisfying endings to companion quest lines. For me at least, a lot of the quest lines that started in Act 1 and ended in Act 3, they had disappointing conclusions, and even companion quest lines such as like Karlach's quest. But when it came to the dungeon quest lines such as like Shadowheart's quest line, as well as Astarion's quest line, I generally felt that those were of a much higher quality and they felt more complete. Also, they felt more intimate in a way, like you had to go to an entirely different place or location that you had to teleport to in order to complete one of your companion's questline. That just feels more intimate, I guess. Like for me, the questline conclusions with Gale and Will, and obviously Karlach, they're a lot less satisfying than the dungeon quest lines that we have. I think a part of that is attributed to my next point, which is that these dungeons have some of the most outrageous and entertaining cutscenes in probably all of gaming. Like some of these cutscenes, like the one with Harleep and the House of Hope, the amount of ways it can go is just so crazy. I've never seen any cutscenes like that. And when you also have certain companions and party members in your parties in these dungeons, like it just makes the cutscenes way better because of the interactivity that's in the game. Like I remember my first time going to the House of Hope and then running into Harleep, and I was like, okay, let me see how this is gonna go. I save scummed a couple of times, and I was just sitting back, I was like, this is what we're doing, huh? Just some of the most out-of-pocket cutscenes I've ever experienced in the game. The same can be said for Shar's Enclave and Cazador's Palace, because whenever you get to the main boss encounter of those locations, you have an opportunity to betray your companion. And I was like, okay, that's, a cool twist. And that kind of stuff, it keeps you entertained. It keeps you on your toes with what's actually happening, because one wrong decision and you can basically screw it all up. So you got to be paying very close attention with what dialogue choices you're picking. But my next point here is that all of the dungeons in Baldursgate 3 sort of have a central theme of like power versus morality. Now, of course, these dungeons are very different and they have their own themes as well. So I would say like Cazador's Palace main theme is probably like control or maybe obsession, whereas the House of Hope main theme is like, I want to say maybe ambition would be the right word. Sarevok's Hideout's main theme is obviously just like brutality and violence. And the Gauntlet of Shar's Outpost main theme is like, I don't know, emotional torment, maybe also emotional suppression in a way. But depending on your decisions earlier with these companions, such as like Shadowheart, so like, is she on the Shar path still? Or is she on the Selûne path, right? And if she's going to take that power whenever she gets to the outpost for herself, or if you're going to just trade her over entirely, right? Like there's multiple opportunities to take power over morality. The same can obviously be said for Astarion's dungeon and questline. This is probably the best example of it, because in this dungeon, we run into a lot of the disturbing acts that Astarion did for Cazador. We end up encountering a lot of people from his past, and Astarion is surprised by this, and he's sort of taken off guard because he regrets it in some small way. We get to see like how much is actually weighing on his mind, even though he tries to hide it. And at the end of all of that, after Astarion has killed Cazador, he can either ascend and take all of that power for himself, which he originally thought he was going to do, or you can convince him to set his brothers and sisters free. And I feel like this is probably the best option here. If you pick the second option, Astarion makes it clear later on that he finally realizes that was the right decision for him, so that he can finally be free of the cycle of, control and greed and abuse and torment and stuff like that. I personally was shocked by the fact that this dilemma of power versus morality is also present in Sarevok's Hideout if you bring both Jaheira and Minsk. The fact that you can surrender both Jaheira and Minsk, even if you're on a good playthrough to Sarevok, like that to me, I'm just like, this game has so much player choice. Like it lets you go through the trouble of recruiting both Jaheira and Minsk, but you can still betray both of them to gain power. Now this example is sort of disconnected from the House of Hope since there's no real companion connection there, but I guess in some ways still does hold true if you just ignore Hope and if you don't rescue her at all. So it still has that theme of like power versus morality there as well. But next up is the atmosphere and vibe of the main locations in Baldur's Gate compared to the dungeons. So like if you compare the very, I want to say bustling excitement, I guess, of Worms Crossing in the lower city where they have these circuses and magic shows. And if you compare that to the underworld and the dungeons of Baldur's Gate 3, which have a unique atmosphere as well, but like it still feels dangerous. This is an important detail to me because as a dungeon, it is important to maintain a level of secrecy but also discoverability, so it feels both like alluring and also unfamiliar at the same time. And I feel like that can lead you into some unexpected surprises if it's done well. And that leads me to my next point, which is that the focused and contained stories within the dungeons themselves often leads to deep lore drops. Take for instance Shar's Enclave and Sarevok's Hideout. Both of those locations have characters from previous Baldur's Gate games, and exploring those dungeons with previous game companions such as like Jahir and Minsk will often lead to unique interactions between both of the parties, and it will also expand on the history that they share. So even if you didn't play Baldur's Gates 1 and 2, which most people didn't who played Baldur's Gate 3, but you can still have an understanding of those games and what the conflicts were that took place just by having the right companions in your party. As for the House of Hope and Cazador's Palace, if you stop and speak to every NPC and read every text or every book that you come across, it starts to paint a clear picture of what led your companions to dealing with these characters.
I did not think it possible. Thank you. My spirit smiles for the first time in a century.
You know, whether it's learning about Cazador's past master who ended up shaping him into who he was, and you get a deeper understanding of Cazador, or learning about Raphael's history with the Nine Hells as well as the Gdanki and the Orphic Hammer.
Good luck to you, little rabbit. You're a finer hunter than any wolf.
Every dungeon location in Baldur's Gate 3 has a story in itself that's contained to that location. Also, another thing about the dungeons that just sets it apart from the rest of the game is that it introduces some of the best characters in the entire game. Like Hope is in my top 3 characters in the game, and she's literally restricted to the House of Hope. Her entire screen time is probably in like 2 to 3 hours, depending on how long it takes you to clear the dungeon. But yeah, I don't know, her very endearing and very eccentric personality instantly drew me in, and is one of the best things about the House of Hope.
I'd blush if they had left me any skin to redden, and I would kiss you if they had not torn off my legs. You truly are the kindest fool I've ever met.
And the same can be said about Cazador, who genuinely like disgusts me, and a character like that should disgust you. This is also something I want to say is that the voice performances for these characters is outrageously good. Like, we know that the voice performances in Baldur's Gate 3 is top of the industry, and some of the best voice actors have really made a name for themselves in the industry through this game, such as like Jennifer English. But the voice performances combined with the very intriguing and interesting nature of these characters that are introduced through these dungeons is a big part as to why I ended up liking these characters so much, or at least liking their screen presence. But to get away from the characters in the story for a second, I want to say that the boss fights in these dungeons are by far the best boss fights in the game. Like, I remember doing the Kettrick Thorn boss fight, and it was a bit of a letdown, I'm not gonna lie. Also, considering the fact that you can basically wipe out all the Moonrise before the final boss encounter, or at least the first phase of it. To me, that massively dampened the final boss of Act 2. Also, the final boss fight in the game against the Elderbrain and the Absolute is just kind of a bang out. Like, it's just kind of a everyone going against everyone, and it's, I don't know, for some reason that feels a little less impactful to me. And if you're playing against all these bosses on honor mode with all of their abilities, their legendary action, and facing them at full strength and having to plan meticulously for the boss fight is one of the most rewarding and strategical feelings in all of Baldur's Gate 3. But my next and final point as to why the dungeons in Baldur's Gate 3 are its best content and masterpieces by far is the immersion of the ambience soundtrack.
Neither party will let the other walk out of here alive.
What purpose do you have in bringing these heretics to the court of Baal? Speak, or death will be your final word.
I always talk about how immersive a game is often affected by how good the ambience of the soundtrack is. And the reason I get so lost into a game for hours sometimes is solely dependent on the sound alone. Every soundtrack in every dungeon location fits its theme perfectly. I don't know what it is, but stuff like this, it just engulfs me more than the average person, I feel. To be clear, I don't mean the actual musical tracks or what you find in the playlist on YouTube, for example. I'm talking about the very, very subtle slight tone shifts or the background low tone changes in the ambience, but really just the sound in general. And it's something I don't usually notice until like 5 hours have gone by and I've only done 1 hour of actual end-game progress. That's when I realized that I'm treating this like a real life situation almost, because I'm just completely attached to it, because I have my 100% undivided attention until the end. And that's something that very few games have ever done for me. Like maybe The Witcher 3, obviously Baldursgate 3, I guess like Resident Evil 2 Remake has done that for me. I want to say The Wolf Among Us has actually done that for me as well. Like the vibe of that game is always insane. I always want to complete the whole game every time I play that game. And that's partially because of how good the ambiance is. Also, to me, all those games, they just have the best soundtracks in general and the best sound design in general. So yeah, there's that. Baldursgate 3 does have a lot of issues in Act 3. Like I won't lie, Act 3 is I'll probably make a whole video on this at some point, but Act 3 is probably the point where a lot of people just drop Baldursgate 3, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But for me, the dungeons in Act 3 is by far the best content in Baldursgate 3. Like, I literally will have saves, purely, I will name the save Cazador's Palace, that House of Hope, just so that I can go back and replay those areas over and over and over again. They never get old at all. And yes, I am a Baldursgate 3 simp and fanatic, I understand that. So of course I'm going to enjoy it more than the average person. But I still feel like that the dungeon locations in Baldursgate 3 do something that's so like handcrafted and so intimate that few games could ever replicate it. And they're a part of why Baldursgate 3 is my favorite game of all time. Because of these locations here, like some of the best experiences I've had in all of gaming. But yeah, as always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. A lot of people have different opinions on what's the best content in Baldursgate 3, so I'm really interested to see what other people think is actually the best content. Because for a lot of people, it is generally just Act 1 and like the Grove and the Goblin's Camp. And I do love those locations as well, but like they don't hold a candle to the dungeons in Baldursgate 3, at least to me. But yeah, anyways, that's it for me. I'll see you next time.